My question's about substances of human origin. We don't know what the regulatory regime is going to look like after the end of March 2019. What would be the impact for UK patients if the UK diverges from EU regulations covering the safety of blood, tissues, cells and organs?
For us, so many of the patients we support are able to have their lives transformed by a kidney transplant. And so current regulations do allow for organs which are donated in this country, and there is no match for them in this country to be taken to an EU or an EEA country and be given to a patient there, and likewise an organ donated there can come back here. And the reasons for doing that is to get the best possible match, because everybody, I hope, will understand that a transplant will last longer if you have the best possible match. And actually, while it's not a huge amount, a huge number to every single person who benefits from that transplant, it's an amazing and fantastic gift. So we have that well regulated at the moment for the benefit of patients. We have rules for patient safety, and it's already referred to traceability and information there in terms of public health. And we also have those rules in place to prevent organ trafficking, which I'm sure people will know is something that doesn't happen in Europe because we have good regulation there. So just to add specifically to that, there are about 29,000 people on dialysis at the moment in the UK. Just 5,000 of them are well enough to be on the organ donor waiting list, waiting for a transplant. And there are about 50 or so organs which are donated from this country and have been over the last 3 years. We've received, I think, about 74 organs back again. So we're actually net beneficiaries of those rules. I should also say that some of the rules, the harmonisation also applies to living kidney donation as well, and I can talk about that in a little bit more detail anon. So for us, it's very much about maintaining an arrangement that's been put there for very good reason and benefits absolutely everybody, and it's a sort of, it's a humanitarian, an incredibly positive thing to do, because as families and living donors, it's an amazing thing to achieve. So those are probably the key issues I'd like to raise with the committee today, but I would perhaps later like to mention consumables for dialysis equipment, about which there is a particular vulnerability. I'll come back to that.
I think for us the biggest issue is safety. So there is the EMA hold a plasma master file that means that you can trace from the donor to the recipient every single donation of plasma. So that really helps when we're looking at viruses, particularly emerging viruses. We know that when viruses emerge around the world, actually it takes time to work out what they mean. And so if we lose that connection with the EMA plasma file, actually we lose the ability to trace what has happened. And that's absolutely fundamental to safety and preventing happening what has happened in the past. So I think there's something really, really important about that. And I think the other thing is it's really important that we have the ability to go to different areas of the world to receive plasma. We currently can't use UK plasma for our health needs because of variant CJD. We use plasma from abroad. We don't use any UK plasma. So we need to be able to access around the world plasma that is safe. So if a new virus emerges, for example, I don't know, Zika virus, we thought in America that was going to be a big issue. A lot of our plasma does come from America. Actually, we would need to have the opportunity to say we can no longer take plasma from this part of the world because this is happening at this point. We need to be able to access it somewhere else quickly. We need to have all those processes in place. There isn't time to wait. Equally, if something had happened in Europe, we need to be able to switch to another part of the world. We've got that at the moment, and we cannot risk losing that because we can't produce our own. So there's no way, if we haven't got those systems in place, the safety mechanisms in place, that we can actually step up and put something in place quickly.
Do we have that as a result of our membership?
It very much came out of that. Very much came out of that. And my understanding is that we've helped drive a lot of those safety standards now. But there are risks coming forward. So currently there are a few of the EU member states who are increasing their safety profile and their screening that could well come into EU law in the next year or two. For example, screening for hepatitis E Some countries are beginning to do that. The UK have said, we can't afford to start screening for that. It's not part of the legislation, we won't do it. But if it becomes EU legislation in the next year or so, and we follow what has been said today, which is we can't afford to do it, actually our plasma won't be as safe going forward. So it's really important that we don't allow that to happen, because that's actually what happened in the past, and we ended up with 6,000 people with bloodborne viruses.
So on day one, Ian, from what I understand, the plan is that we have regulatory alignment.
Yeah.
We transpose all of the existing EU regulations into our retained EU law, but the EU may change going forward, and that could mean that currently unknown emerging viruses, other EU countries may be protected against, but we wouldn't be.
And can I ask for a clarification from yourself, Jean? I mean, we've heard the clear case for ongoing regulatory alignment in the interest of safety, not just for people in the UK but in the EU. But we've also heard that there can be no sector-by-sector deals, special deals. So if all of this falls down because of an issue in another sector, we could find ourselves thrown into a sort of cliff edge, chaotic Brexit. How satisfied are you, Jean, that there is some contingency planning going on for that? In other words, would there be mechanisms to bypass this so that information sharing could keep happening because it's clearly in everybody's best interest?
Well, first of all, I have no backdoor access to the information in terms of what is happening at the moment. What I would anticipate one would need is specific agreements to address various issues, both in terms of access to things like databases, whether we'd be able to in fact buy into those. I mean, you've got the analogies of those you'll be coming on to when you look at medicines regulation later on, and how that's actually a real question will work. So specific agreements in relation to that, I think, would have to be addressed. There are questions in relation, again, to transplant issues that would need to be addressed. Actually, in terms of the cliff edge, I mean, there is the other issue in terms of material passing over the Northern Ireland border, which would also need to be addressed. I understand in terms of organs, for example, that there are organs that either transplanted passed across, and you know, let's come back to that in a second. So that those sorts of questions, I think, would have to be addressed as well, and presumably fairly rapidly.
Ian, you mentioned the ECDC, the European Centre for Disease Prevention and Control. Presumably, we will be leaving the ECDC. We've heard quite a lot about us leaving Euratom and us leaving the EMA, but we haven't particularly been focusing on that. It's a focal point for looking at a global level for surveillance of bloodborne viruses, isn't it? How are we going to continue that global surveillance if we're not members of the ECDC?
The answer is, I think at the moment we're still trying to work out what the avenues that we can use going forward are, if that's not available. We are members of the Alliance of Blood Operators, for example, in America. We've got very strong links with Australia, New Zealand, etc. So I think we are in the process at the moment of looking at what options we will have and talking to the department to try and make sure we maintain collaborations where we can going forward.
So we might have to align ourselves with an Australian surveillance organisation instead of a European one.
That's speculation at the moment, but we're going through all of the potential options that there are so that we're ready when that comes about.
Thanks.
Thank you. Luciane.
You have already answered this question, but an extension of Paul's question to you all. If the UK does become a third country, how do you believe that this would affect the import and export of blood, tissues and organs from within the EEA? And particularly what you believe the risks are to patients, and if you think there's any opportunities that would be available as well. But that hasn't come forward so far.
There is importation of tissues. There's importation of just the fresh frozen plasma, which I've talked about, and there is a small number of organs that do exchange as Fiona's mentioned. In terms of blood supply, we're generally self-sufficient in terms of blood supply in the UK, so that wouldn't be an issue. I think in terms of the organs, which would be the main ones that we would be concerned about, we would want to maintain a collaborative arrangement or mutual arrangement to allow us to continue, because as Fiona said, those situations where organs, 3 people die every day because we haven't got enough organs, we must improve our rate of organ donation, and any arrangements that we have must continue that, and that's what the information we've fed into the Department of Health and asked them to seek out collaborations and arrangements which allow that to continue.
And have you received any assurances or any feedback from the department?
That's an ongoing process at the moment.
Right.
So could I just add to that as well? So obviously that's incredibly important to the population that we support, but I also want to mention time as well. So the arrangements we have at the moment allow for rapid and seamless transportation of organs between countries. You may well be aware that if an organ is donated, it needs to be treated and packed in ice so it can be safely transported. And depending on the organ, I'm talking about kidneys, but just as well as kidneys, other organs can be moved between countries. And I believe that hearts is about 4 hours they last for. Kidneys could last nowadays perhaps up to 48 hours. But you can see there is a definite period of time, and the shorter the better. So what we would absolutely not want to have is arrangements with every single one of the other 27 member states who have to do something different depending on how the organ is being moved through Europe. And actually that could absolutely endanger the ability of that transplant to take place. And now specifically talking about Ireland as well, there are some very particular arrangements with Ireland. So in terms of paediatric transplants, my colleagues at the Irish Kidney Association have let me know that the paediatric patients from Ireland will come to England to receive their transplants. There's also something you can probably comment on a little bit more, but I've got this anyway, that people with liver failure, the UK and Ireland also share livers.